Hello there, and welcome to Red Moon Roleplaying. We're going to be beginning something new here today. And you have me, Mattiaz, here, and you have Craig.
Good evening, Patreons and listeners alike.
Yes, indeed. And we have Hjalmar here.
Hello there.
Yes, and the thing that makes today so special is that we are joined by a guest Gamemaster, and it is Matthew Dawkins, who you may know as the Gentleman Gamer. Welcome, Matthew.
Very happy to be here.
So, for those of our listeners who are not familiar with Matthew Dawkins or the Gentleman Gamer, can you perhaps say a few words about who you are and what you've been doing so far?
Well, as introduced, my name is Matthew Dawkins. I'm a writer and developer in role-playing games and for some video games too. But my greatest experience, the thing I'm most known for, is my association with Vampire the Masquerade. I've been writing and developing for Vampire for around 5 years, and I've got credits such as Beckett's Jihad Diary, V5, Chicago by Night, and a slew of other books to my name. I've also worked on Cult, on various Chronicles of Darkness books, Modern Age, Call of Cthulhu, and a whole bunch of others. I've been working quite prolifically for the last handful of years. And I also have a YouTube channel, which is called The Gentleman Gamer, which I've recently taken over to the Onyx Path YouTube channel, where I guess made my name in vlogging circles as The Gentleman's Guide to Vampires and later The Pentex Guide to Werewolves, which proved to be a very popular series introducing people to the concepts and groups within Werewolf the Apocalypse and Vampire the Masquerade. This game that we're going to be running is They Came From Beneath the Sea. And They Came From Beneath the Sea was initially a concept that I guess I came up with around 10 years ago. And back then it was a very different game to what it is now. In the last few years, I pitched the concept, once it had been refined, play-tested a little, to Rich Thomas of Onyx Path Publishing, a frequent employer of mine, and he liked it enough to purchase it from me. We have then gone on to write the game in full, develop it. Art is now rolling in. There's a successful Kickstarter, currently running with around a week left at time of recording. And They Came From Beneath the Sea is, or can best be summed up as, a game of 1950s B-movie sci-fi, with as much hilarity or horror as the group playing deems necessary. So that is what we will be playing today.
Yes, indeed, and we are very, very much looking forward to that. So, what we will be beginning with, I suppose, is trying to define who we will be playing. So, Matthew, why don't you take us into that process?
So if you three, the players, cast your minds to 1950s America, you can no doubt picture the white picket fences, the hot rods, the greasers with their slick back hair, the drive-in theatres, the diners selling $1 milkshakes, Jerry Lee Lewis probably belting something over the radio, and the like. You've all seen the kinds of movies, the Happy Days-like TV shows. You can picture that idyllic post-war America that seems strangely guarded and yet oblivious to the threat of nuclear war that's just potentially around the corner. Despite the fact that everyone is living in these ideal, sterile homes, we are presented in the media with the horror of Cold War. And yet it comes in the form of alien movies, alien invasion movies, movies like Them, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, It Came From Beneath the Sea, and other movies like that are all rough metaphors for Soviet invasion, communist threat, intruders posing as humans, invasions of the body snatchers. And this is the world in which your characters live. As far as they're concerned, maybe life couldn't be much better, but to some, there's going to be a slight edge. They may be a bit paranoid. Maybe they have only just recovered from the horrors of the Second World War. Maybe they've only just returned from Korea. And they know that this ideal world cannot last. That's where we come in, for they came from beneath the sea. The ideal cannot hold. Something is going to break this veneer of perfection. So our characters, the first thing we do is come up with just a general concept. And in our book we give various conceptual ideas such as monster hunter, reporter who gets in too deep, an out-of-touch suburban housewife, or an ex-military conspiracy theorist. All we need at this point are your one-liners, things to define the kind of character you want to play, and this may give us some indication as to the various origins and archetypes you will later pick in character creation. So, starting with Craig, what concept do you have in mind for your character?
Well, hard to put into words, but I think the idea I was going with was the concept of the well-funded, extremely intelligent, but perhaps slightly aloof scientist. Out there, finding things for himself, but older and perhaps not quite social or pleasant. But perhaps if we put that in a sentence, let's say... What do you guys think? Well...
Misanthropic scientist?
Yes, there we go. Yes, that's good. Misanthropic scientist.
Okay, and Hjalmar, how about you?
Yes. I'm gonna play Benny Clyde Rosberg, or BC as they call him. He is a high-altitude show-off. He works on construction sites, preferably high up in the air. He likes to do things that draw attention to himself. He can do anything if people are watching.
Okay, lovely. And Mattiaz?
I shall be playing Jonas Faulkner, an FBI agent with something to prove. My idea is that Jonas here comes from what was a rich household in Oklahoma, but then the Dust Bowl came and they lost everything. He ended up going to Korea, and now he's with the FBI, but he cannot forget the humiliation and shame from his childhood, from losing everything and from being this worthless Okie. So he's got something to prove, and he wants to crack a big case. So an FBI agent with something to prove.
Lovely. Okay, well, it sounds like you've actually got the building blocks very much in place for each of your characters. Next step, usually on character creation, would be to set up your aspirations. Now, the way aspirations work, they are very much meta factors. They aren't your character's goals, they're your goals as players. And so usually you set up 2 short-term ones, 1 long-term one. The short-term ones are things you wish to achieve in a single session. Long-term in the course of a story. And they tend to work communally, because if you can achieve a short-term aspiration for a character, the entire group gets rewarded with experience. So the idea being that you will help each other as players achieve the kind of things you want. So we don't have to break it down entirely, because we know that, pragmatically speaking, we're not going to be playing this for months and months. So let's, for the time being, just look at a single short-term aspiration. What is the kind of thing that the 3 of you want to achieve for each of your characters by the end of our first session?
I was thinking for Jonas Faulkner here, obviously I'm not entirely sure on exactly what circumstances we will find ourselves in, but as an FBI agent who wants to crack a big case, he's of course gonna want to find that lead, that first thing that sort of draws him towards something greater. Starting to unravel the mystery. Okay, so
yours we'll say uncover a mystery, first of all. Means you don't have to solve it, there's less pressure on you.
Excellent.
I think in my case, at this point in time, being a little uninspired by the way the world's going, I would love to just find something new, something to inspire me for future research, something maybe beyond what man is currently achieving. Yes, that would definitely be just the, learning of it as opposed to understanding it at this point.
Yeah, so in any other world, in any other game, the idea of discovering something new in a single session might seem a tall order, but in this game that should be quite achievable. And how about BC Rosberg?
Well, BC lives to impress people, so I think that my short-term aspiration would to impress someone that he doesn't know already, or proves to someone that he knows that he can do something that's different. I just have impressed someone currently. What do you think about that?
I think that works nicely. It gives the three of you different aspirations. They can work quite nicely in sync with each other, and you can set each other up to achieve those aspirations. So that's good. So next up is the paths, and we're already on step 2 of the character creation. We go through it pretty quickly in this game, thankfully. There's 3 paths that the characters are defined by in the story path system, which is the system They Came From Beneath the Sea uses. And those 3 paths are archetype, origin, and ambition. They help define the skills you have access to at the start of the game, along with trademarks that are tied to it, and some other tropes, some powers that are specific to your archetype. Before we get into that in detail, we will look at your archetypes first, because archetypes tend to be the things people focus on most. They're your classes, your clans, and so on. So archetypes in this game fall into 5 camps. We have everymen. Those are your blue-collar, working-class heroes just wanting to defend their patch of land. You have your G-men, your government agents, your sheriffs, any kind of municipal force or federal force in the game, someone with authority. You have your scientists, mad or otherwise, experimental or otherwise. They could have been smuggled to America from a hostile country in the 1940s. We don't know. You can decide on that. We have our mouths. Now, mouths are your plucky journalists, your entertainers, your reporters on the scene, your actors who just want to make a big break, or your travelling musicians who just happen to stumble into these horrible calamities. And then you have your survivors. Survivors are your grizzled veterans, your survivors of the Second World War, of Korea, people who may well now live out in the wilderness and want to just be left alone until, of course, danger comes calling. Now, I am going to say at this point that this game is taking a slightly more horrific turn than most games of They Came From Beneath the Sea. Your characters aren't going to be, or may start as, plucky, upbeat, optimistic, young things, but they probably won't be by the end of it. And therefore, you should keep in mind that whatever archetype you pick, you may want to take it with a slightly more jaded edge, or a view to what you can get out of it, rather than how to defend your common man. Now, you may end up leaning toward that anyway, but I guess on the D&D alignment scale, consider your characters neutral at best.
So you're thinking, like, not too... I mean, a bit more selfish characters, or... Yeah.
These are still going to be characters in a B-movie, but it's a B-movie more on the horror vein than the sci-fi vein, I think. Like you say, in those kinds of movies, characters do tend to act with a little more self-awareness, maybe, a little more selfishness, and they will throw the slow person in the path of the rolling monstrosity in order to save themselves.
So, I'll go first, as I've already chosen the archetype. Scientist. Dr. Charles White. I'm in my 50s, and I am certainly an aged, learned man.
Lovely. And how about Hjalmar?
Well, my character is sort of swimming a little between the everyman and the mouth, but I don't want him to be the sort of... He loves to show off, he loves the, being in the center of attention, but he's not trying to make his living as such, which I think sort of makes him more towards the everyman. He likes to be in a normal setting where he can show off. So I guess like a small fish in a... or a big fish in a small pond, I don't know. So I'd say he would be an everyman more than a loudmouth. But I do like the idea of that you can choose your tropes, we will be getting to later, that you get to choose one from another archetype.
Exactly.
That still applies. Yes, and then you can make this sort of mix. But I'll say everyman for now.
Okay, well that just leaves you, Mattiaz.
Well, I shall of course be a G-man. There's nothing more G than an FBI agent, so there you go.
Exactly. So next we move on to our origin, and origins refer to your character's upbringing. We provide some examples in the book, including suburban, army veteran, touched by an alien, life of privilege, an adventurer. You can also have religious upbringing, or if you like. We haven't included this in the book, but if we're going the more horrific element, you can imagine a more fundamentalist upbringing, a more cloistered origin, someone who has been kept away from society, if you particularly want. Now, I don't know that any of your characters are going for that, but it's something you may want to consider. All of these are innately customizable, except for the archetypes, which are, at this point, defined as the 5 in the book. Origins and ambitions can be made up as you see fit. So, do you see any particular origin in mind for your character, Craig?
Well, looking at the ones available and thinking about what I had in mind, life of privilege probably fits it quite closely. As in, originally I'm an English gentleman, and so being a young man in the 1900s to become what I've become today, I would have had a very good old family and gone to the best universities for the time. So I definitely think I had a very good, educated, well-connected upbringing. So maybe that one could be the one we go with.
Okay, I think it works. It makes sense given that your character seems quite jaded to reality as well. He's probably experienced a lot due to his life of privilege.
I have indeed, and not all of it pleasant, but we can leave that for later. But yes, so if I go with that one, then how would we go with things like, for example, the skills?
Well, each path has 4 skills associated with it. It can be the same skills, you can repeat them over and over again. The point being that when you play your path, when you get your experience points, you get to assign them to one of the 3 path elements of your character. So if you wish to essentially level up your origin, you can assign your experience to the skills associated with your origin. If you want to level up your scientist archetype, you can assign your points to that. So we pick 4 skills at this point to go with each path. The archetype is the only one where those skills are generally defined, but in honesty, you do have customizability. You can make the characters whatever you see fit if you wish. It's just we generally offer, I guess, a diverse range of skills if you pick an interesting range of archetypes, origins, and ambitions. So I would suggest that, because listeners may not find it terribly interesting, we won't go through the breakdown of skill by skill necessarily, or we might do that, but we probably won't go into point allocation because people don't want to hear numbers. But when we have gone through origins and ambitions, I'll quickly go through the 3 of you, and you can tell me the kind of skills you have in mind for your characters, and if you can note them down, that would be useful.
Excellent. All right, yeah, let's do that then. So for now, I will say I will go with the life of privilege origin.
Okay, and what I will I'll ask you to pick your ambition as well now, Craig, because if you do that, you can start looking at the skills at this early point, and then by the time we get back round to you, you should have some skills in mind.
Of course. So for ambition, that would be... How would you explain that?
So ambition is what drives your character. It's what your character's goals are rather than you. Now, it's often through the lens of community. Why do you essentially do what you do as this jaded scientist? And these can be grandiose or they can be minor. It may be because you're a family man. It may be because you're a lone wolf. It may be because you want to become a community leader, or because you want to earn money, or you want revenge. I think we even have an example later on of you just want to be friends with someone. You know, you're lonely and you want somebody. And so that can be an ambition. They can be as simplistic or as complex as you like.
Well, then let's go with this. I'll explain what I think I want, and you can then best fit me. I believe that when I was a younger man, my goals as a scientist were very for the good of the world. I wanted to make the world a better place. Unfortunately, I experienced some great tragedy early in my life. Maybe we'll go into that later. Let's just say, though, that the consequences of that tragedy meant that rather than wanting to do it for the betterment of the world in general, I wanted to do it in spite of the world. The world is a flawed and awful place, and I will find a way to improve it, no matter what other people maybe think.
Okay, I'm almost tempted to put that down as out for revenge, using the example there, because you are, as you say, doing this out of spite for the world.
Yes, I'll be honest, I was actually looking at that one as well and thinking, especially when I give you the details later on, maybe I definitely do blame someone.
Yeah, whether it's the rest of humanity, a specific person, or society in general, or what have you, you are out for revenge in a very specific kind of a way. So go for that.
Excellent. All right, so I'll go for that one, and now I'll start looking over some of those skills. Did you say each path has how many skills?
So you get 4 skills associated with the path, which 4 skills are up to you, but you should be prepared to justify non-obvious choices. You gain 3 dots to distribute among the 4 skills you choose for each path. So one of them, at least one of them, is going to be empty. A player may choose to put all 3 dots in one skill, divide the dots among 2 or 3 skills. You may not use dots from one path for skills associated with a different path.
And total then, if you've chosen 3 paths, the archetype, the origin, and the ambition, that would mean you're choosing from a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12 skills.
12 skills,
Yes.
9 dots.
Very good.
They may well overlap those skills.
Yes, you can have, for instance, aim twice if you particularly want, and it just means you can potentially put more dots in aim at character generation because you have aim for your origin your archetype, or your archetype and your ambition, for instance. So we'll move on to Hjalmar. We have to decide on your origin and ambition as well. Have you had any thoughts regarding this?
I've been looking through the origins and the ambitions, and I think I might need your help just to make a final decision. I want him to be this. He comes from a hard-working family. He wants to prove that if I can do it, anyone can do it. He wants to impress people. He wants everyone ultimately to have his photo on the wall there in their homes. But he comes from a kind of not very interesting kind of origin, and I'm either looking at the adventurer origin as tying that together with how he has become this working on skyscrapers on high altitude. He thrives on being up there in a sort of extreme situation working, or he could, I don't know if he has a connection to the street and being a street rat.
I think street rat, or even the, I guess the contrarian in me says go for suburbia. You're the kind of person that lives for the thrill because you grew up in relative comfort. And so adventurer would imply that you've always been this way. I almost see your character as, I guess, breaking into this need for speed, if you like, when you've grown up, because you wanted to break free from the mold that society set for you.
Yeah.
So up to
like
you
that.
how you see your character's, I guess, social class, whether you'd go for street rat or suburbia.
Well, it's kind of grown out of growing up, I suppose, but maybe he was doing it a fair bit when he was growing up as well. He was trying to show off. He didn't do very well in school, but yeah. Maybe that comes from being in a sort of too secure kind of lifestyle.
Let's go for that. Let's go for suburbia.
Yeah, let's do that.
And that leaves you with ambition. Now, there's a whole bunch of ambitions provided. I would almost suggest that the adventurer origin path, we move to the ambition section for your character. Because there's no reason that you can't in this game. They are just examples. So your character wants to be seen as an adventurer, this high-risk taker, and probably wants to win, well, not necessarily awards, but applause from other people. As we know, your aspiration is for this character to impress someone. So I think looking at the adventurer's skills at origin point, you could probably apply that to your ambition pretty easily.
Yeah, I could see that, definitely. So I'll put that for now, and transfer whatever we got there from skills and trademarks and stuff.
Yeah,
cool.
Again, by all means, if you find that the skills that your character is allocated don't fit your concept, switch them around. There is no definition when it comes to skills. It just requires justification if you decide to pick aim and, I don't know, any kind of fighting skill, and you pick suburbia as an example. But if you've picked adventurer, it makes more sense.
Yeah, okay, cool, thanks.
So that just leaves us with our Agent Faulkner, Mattiaz.
Indeed. So when I'm looking at origin path, I'm thinking that Jonas here, the family, as I said, he comes from a rich background. He comes from having gotten pretty good schooling early on, but then the Dust Bowl hit, then they lost everything, and basically his family had to move to the city, and they ultimately came with very little, and ended up, I don't know, maybe it's not the city, maybe it's, I'm thinking these fruit fields, yeah? They were these Okies who had to work these fruit fields for almost no money. Maybe they had to have other jobs on top of that, and they still wanted Jonas to go to school, but I think maybe he ended up without having parents so close by. They were perhaps quite absent because they were working 3 jobs. So he ended up probably getting in touch with the streets, with the kids who didn't have a family, because effectively he kind of didn't. So I was thinking about the street rat.
Yeah, I think that would work well. Initially I was going to suggest army veteran, but I think in a way the being a street rat as a child probably had more impact on your character than serving for a few years in the army.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking, and it also sort of connects well, I think, with some of the aspects of my background story there. So I like street rat, and I like that sort of being sort of the big drive that he has, really, to sort of that he comes back to that and comes back to his experiences there, and wanting to really prove himself, and maybe then leading into ambition, where I was thinking family man, and I was thinking that he wants to be able to take care of his family. He still has contact with them, and he wants them to be proud of him, and he wants to make sure that they can live a comfortable life. I think he's probably sending them quite a lot of money already today, but he has an ambition probably to provide even more somehow, and that his family is important to him, and that's where his focus lies on some level.
And I think that's an interesting take on a G-Man character. You often see them as nothing but hard-boiled career men, but the idea of him having the ambition of being a family man, being able to settle down, have a normal life after the rough upbringing that he's endured, the military service, and now service to the government, investigating who knows what, is quite aspirational, to use the wrong term for this game, but I think that works out well.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's going to be fun to see how well that goes.
Excellent. So we'll get on to the next stages. The book does explain that each path lists several trademarks available to the path. Trademarks, you may want to note this, you get 1 trademark for your origin, 1 for your ambition, 2 for your archetype. And trademarks are, in World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness terms, your specialities, ways you use your skills or attributes in a way that are particularly fitting for your character. But unlike those games, it isn't aim and the speciality is pistols. You would usually have some kind of descriptive text that you would have to tie in to the use of that weapon, or to the use of that skill, or the use of that attribute. And it gives you a bit of creative freedom, rather than restricting you to always being the guy running around with a pistol. It's how you describe that trademark that you end up using it. But we'll get on to that in future. It won't take long for us to get there. So now we actually move on to skills themselves. So we've already ascertained that you would have received 9 dots because of what you're assigned per path. You get an additional 6 dots to distribute among any of the skills, and the skills don't have to be tied to your paths in any way. So that basically totals with you having 15 dots throughout your skills. What I would suggest is, and you don't have to follow this, if you particularly want for characters to have more than 5 dots at this point, you can do it, but I generally suggest that no one goes over 5 dots in a skill at this point. It does make them rather over-focused. Likewise, we don't really need to break down exactly how many dots you have in the skills. As mentioned, listeners probably aren't going to be terribly interested in that. So what I will say, now that you've had a bit of time to look over your skills, Craig, and if you've opened up the chapter 4, which actually lays out all of the skills in the game, you may have found some that you weren't immediately aware of, but if not, that's fine. What skills are you thinking are going to be the strengths for your character, and which ones do you think that they are going to particularly suffer in the use of?
Well, I just went straight up for saying that I would put all my points into enigmas and science, primarily because I am a scientist. That is my main interest. Enigmas as well is my mystery solving or desire to find out more. And then, between my then background of a life of privilege and I, believed I'd have a little bit of culture and integrity, and then in terms of my revenge, I think actually that was where I took most of the enigma points from, really, was because it's more I've been inspired to find out more about the world because the world needs fixing, rather than because it's a good place. I also threw some of those 3 points in technology, because again, science, technology. So I think those are my 5 things I would say I have skill in.
And how about you, Hjalmar?
Yes, I am just looking at the sort of lists of skills now, and I'm not really sure which ones would be best associated with the different ones. Archetype-wise, I might need a bit of hand here, because what I've got here from the original rules is that you could have aim, culture, larceny, and technology.
Mm-hmm.
But then you could actually have like anything if you're in every, if you're motivated. Is that right?
Yeah, you can move your skills around however you see fit, really. And every man especially, that's the case, because as a blue-collar worker, you could theoretically be trained in anything.
Yeah. I don't really see him having aim. Is that sort of just shooting, basically? Or?
Yeah, it will be shooting, and because the game is predominantly focused in America, there's a certain, I guess, tradition to the working classes firing weapons.
Yeah.
But... and especially if you've... but I think... Well, I was going to say especially if you've served in the military, but your character seems to me a bit maybe young to have done that, or maybe just brushed by 1945, hitting the age where he could have joined, but maybe he got out of it on an injury, hence his suburban background. Maybe he had bone spurs, you never know.
Yeah.
But I would say for your everyman, it depends on the kind of blue-collar background your character was from. Let's think of who his parents might have been. Was his dad an engineer, maybe? Or some kind of... or a plumber. That all that kind of thing leads to technology.
Yeah, I'm thinking perhaps more like plumber, yes. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, it's a bit of technology there.
So you might want to use technology, maybe use pilot. Maybe your dad had you driving the pickup from job to job.
Yeah.
Pilot equates to drive in this game as well.
Yeah, I like that.
Now, you don't necessarily have to take larceny. Larceny doesn't just have to be theft. It is sleight of hand, I guess.
No, I don't really like larceny for him, but I do like culture, as in watching TV and watching the news or reading the news and things like that.
Okay, so those 3 skills are probably what you're going to be looking at, maybe 1 dot each for your origin. In terms of your archetype, that is your archetype. In terms of your origin, which was suburbia, that would also play into culture, maybe. And I would also think, perhaps, let's think... integrity, if your family were honest in what they did.
Yeah, I like that. I like him being a very upfront kind of character. Mm-hmm. I've been looking at the tropes and stuff, and I like the idea of the sort of being honest. Honesty is the best policy kind of thing.
Yeah, I think your origin and archetype actually tie very nicely into each other. So don't be afraid to have a little bit of crossover there in terms of your skills. If you feel one very much feeds into the other, that it was your suburban upbringing that led you to be an everyman, then by all means have a bit of crossover, maybe have a different 4th skill each time, but it does mean you get 6 points to spread between, theoretical 8 skills. We could actually narrow that down to 6 skills if you've got a lot of crossover there.
Yeah, true. But is it 3 or... It's 4 skills that you choose, and then you can put 3 dots between them, right?
Yeah, 3 per path.
Yeah, I suppose if it would make sense to always have if aim is a common thing that you would do, everyone has a gun, basically, I don't know. Maybe he has it as an archetype skill as well, if we have to choose 4.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, you can still choose a 4th one, doesn't mean you have to put any points in it yet. And then we have your final path, which is your adventurer, where I think athletics has definitely got to play a role.
True, yes, let's put that there.
Probably even pilot again.
Yes, I was thinking that too, actually. So maybe I pilot again and...
We don't often get characters with a skill repeated 3 times across 3 paths, but I think this could be quite interesting. It would imply, I guess, your character is on the right course for as far as his fate is concerned.
Oh, do you mean that pilot-wise, that it goes through the archetype, the origin, and the ambition?
Well, I'm seeing it there in your everyman archetype. If I guess you were working as an apprentice plumber, you were simply driving a vehicle around. In terms of suburbia, up to you whether it appears there, but I think it would definitely appear as an adventurer.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun. That's fun. Maybe put in close combat in adventurer as well. Yeah,
you may have got into a few fights. Or simply have practiced some of these new martial arts that have become quite popular in the media.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I think survival might make sense as well as an adventurer. If you've been parachuting out of planes and landing in the wilderness and having to spend a week trekking back to civilization because that's the kind of fun you enjoy, survival may be a thing for you.
Is that available for people, or should we just say that?
Survival is a skill in the game, so you can pick it.
No, I meant like a thing like that, like parachuting out in the wilderness.
Well, how about this? I don't want to necessarily fall on the trope that your parents are dead and you've inherited all their wealth. But I think maybe in the last couple of years, after you made a bit of a career for yourself, you're hopeless at saving money. You do not share your parents' sentiments for keeping everything back for a rainy day and for when the next recession comes. They lived through the Great Depression. You probably didn't. You're too young for that. So your idea of profit is spend it immediately. And so you are a high-risk flyer and adventurer. As soon as you get a bit of cash in, you use it on the next harebrained scheme.
Yeah, exactly, and hope that someone pays attention so that I can show what I've done. And
yeah, well, it won't be long until Evel Knievel and other figures like that start appearing on TV, doing ridiculous stunts for the amusement of onlookers. It's only so far advanced from carnival, trapeze artists and the like.
Yeah, exactly. Though he doesn't have the ambition to sort of train or go to an academy to evolve those kind of specific acrobatic skills or something like that, for example. He'd rather be just seen picking something up and doing it on the fly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. He wants to appear on talent contests, but doesn't want the formal training.
Yeah.
So that just leaves us with our G-Man.
Indeed. So, when we look at the G-Man path, then, I see aim and I see integrity as being quite important skills, or quite important things there. He definitely knows how to shoot a gun, and he can...
Maybe command as well. It depends. If you're a quiet investigator, command may not be effective. But if you are the kind of person that wants to be able to walk into a local pub or diner, hold up a badge and say, FBI, you're going to answer my questions, you're probably going to need at least 1 dot in command.
I think that sounds like a very good idea, actually. I didn't think to include that, but yes, command. Certainly. So aim, integrity, and command, then.
And then we have your origin of street rat.
Yes, and here I was thinking that larceny would be a really fun thing to bring with me from my youth. Being able to go places where you're not supposed to be able to go, pick things, take things that are not yours necessarily. That can be a useful skill to have when you are investigating things, and yes. So I'm thinking larceny. That's a fun one.
Oh, definitely.
And then athletics. I think he has run from trouble more than once, and that is, of course, something that you have to be able to do. It would also fit in with the background of being in the army, and I suppose, if you are an agent, there are certain physical requirements attached to that as well. So athletics and larceny for street rat.
Okay. And by all means pick another couple, even if you're not allocating dots to them. We still want to keep in mind 4 skills per path, even if you're not using all of them yet. And then we have your ambition.
Yes, so family man, and here empathy.
It would be nice to have one character with empathy, wouldn't it?
Yes, that would be a plus. No, but I see that he in the war he worked. He ended up working as an interrogator and being able to read people and being able to influence people. And I think later on, when it comes to things like manipulate, I see that that's something he should be able to handle himself in a violent situation through his gun, but I would rather really solve problems by talking to people and trying to find the truth that way. So yeah, empathy feels like a really good one to take there.
Okay. I would suggest also it may be useful to have persuasion.
Right.
Now, whether you'd want to tie that to either of your previous paths or your family man one, I think persuasion can work. After all, even at its most mundane level, trying to persuade the kids to go to bed, or trying to persuade your wife not to leave you because you've been out late working again, that kind of thing, is a skill you may aspire to have and would tie in nicely to your ambition.
Right. That sounds really good. Persuasion, then. Yes.
And I will leave the other ones up to you, if you like.
Well, I would say sort of the ones that I've sort of already, I guess, started thinking in terms of dots, but I'm thinking he has been in the military, he has learned basic medicine, like first aid. He knows how to patch up a wound, because he's had to do that for a lot of friends who are no longer alive, and close
so
combat.
He's not very good at it.
No, he can just do the basics. He's probably saved someone, but it's mostly just about making people comfortable at the end of life, so to speak. It's difficult to treat gunshot wounds on the battlefield.
It is. And what was the last one you just mentioned?
I think close combat is something that he should be at least not particularly. He doesn't have to be super capable in it, but he should be able to handle himself. And if it turns into fisticuffs, he is after all an agent, and he cannot be completely reliant on his gun. So it would be nice to at least go with one on that later on. So Yeah, that's one that I've been thinking about. Is there any others that you see as being sort of fitting to what I've described about the character?
No, I think that's a decent spread, to be honest. And don't forget, you will have the additional 6 points that you can assign wherever you see fit. So everyone gets 15 skill points to spread across their skills. Only 9 of them are restricted by that path definition. The remaining 6 can go wherever you see fit. So while you're all doing that, and a couple of you may already have done so, we then move on to attributes. And attributes, as anyone familiar with the storyteller or storytelling system will be familiar, are your raw traits, your raw base of knowledge, your physical, your mental, and your social. Now, there's 9 attributes, and you have to rank the arenas, your physical, social, mental, in which your character is most adept. Not necessarily what you prefer, it's just what you're better at. So, for instance, as an example in the book, an amateur private eye may be more adept at social than mental, but likewise may be more adept at mental than physical, so it will be ranked social, mental, physical. But you can assign them in any order you wish. Every character begins with a single attribute dot in each of their attributes. You then distribute 6 dots among the 3 attributes in your top-ranked arena, 4 in your middle, 2 in your bottom-ranked arena. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
So none of your characters will have 0 in an attribute.
Very good. And then I believe you then also have a favoured approach.
You do indeed. Thank you. Well done for reading ahead. Because, yes, you have a favoured approach as to how you apply your attributes. And those favoured approaches are force, finesse, and resilience. You place 1 additional dot in each of the attributes in your character's favoured approach. So essentially you're going down, 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 and then you're going across, 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 although you're only going to be going across once, if you picture the attribute table in your mind. So once you've allocated your dots in terms of arenas, we then look at approaches. So, very simply, Craig, what I can kind of picture your character's order, but it may not be what I'm expecting. So, what arenas does your scientist favour, and what are they weakest at, I should say?
Well, I had been reading this section while you guys were talking earlier, so I think hopefully I've actually done the whole thing. Hopefully. But what I will say for now is I chose to favour mental, then social, and finally physical.
Okay, and what's your favourite approach? Force, finesse, or resilience?
Force.
So intellect, might, and presence?
Yes. And then with a final little free dot as well, it says here, I believe I have my rankings of an intellect of 5, a might of 3, a presence of 3, a cunning of 2, dexterity 2, manipulation 2, resolve 3, stamina 2, composure 3. So as you can see, largely my mental skill stats are my best. My physicals aren't great, though they're not the worst. And then likewise, some of my social skills, again, not terrible, but not great. I definitely focus my most attention on my mind. Although I do have some might, because even though I'm not a strong man, I'm very determined sometimes, despite my frail stamina and dexterity.
No, I like that a lot. And that tells us a lot about your character. And I think what we can say from the breakdown of both your skills and your attributes is, while you have an incredibly high intellect, you have 0 empathy. So I don't know that says anything particularly positive about your scientist, but maybe it's not the kind of game where we should.
Well, I also have a reason for, you know what, I can tell this reason because it will come apparent in play very quickly. You see, I have a leg injury. That for my entire life, well, not my entire life, since the incident, has meant that I require a cane. So that's why dexterity 2 is very low, because I'm not going to be running around very good on a cane.
Okay. Oh, I think that works well, and it gives us a nice picture of your character as well. And one thing I will say, just to, I guess, break proceedings briefly, is we are breaking down the character creation step by step here. And when we initially talked about doing this, I imagined us sort of flowing through it, but I'm actually enjoying this. It's fun to have a chance to get a bit of back and forth with the players, and hopefully the listeners are enjoying the explanation of the characters that you're going to see in play, or hear in play soon.
Yeah, I think it's good with a nice session 0 style thing as well. And you can decide whether or not you want to listen to it as a listener.
Exactly. So, speaking of BC Rosberg and people wanting to listen to him or not.
Yes. I am not that far ahead as Craig has progressed. So I might need a bit more of an...
A moment. Well, would you say, Mattiaz, are you feeling more ready? Maybe you could go next.
Perhaps, at least in terms of ranking the arenas, I feel pretty good. I had a breakdown of the attributes before. I'm not sure if I've gotten the numbers right, but my idea was that the arenas would be social, mental, and then physical last.
Okay, so that's 2 characters with physical last. I'm hoping BC brings out something surprising, but if not, that's absolutely fine as well.
And then in terms of the next part, the favorite approach, I was thinking finesse, resilience, and then force.
Well, you only need to pick one.
Right, so finesse.
Finesse works fine. That's cunning, dexterity, and manipulation that you'll get an additional dot in.
Yes.
Okay, then. Hjalmar, for BC, we basically need to work out whether his strength is in physical, mental, or social as a primary.
Right.
I imagine it will be physical if the life of an adventurer is, I guess, prime for him, but just because it may be the most important thing to him doesn't mean he's necessarily adept at it. He may be more sociable than physically capable, which means social could be primary, physical could be secondary, and mental could be tertiary. What do you think?
I like the idea that he is quite clever too, which is why he's able to sort of pick things up and actually do something and surprise people in that way too. I like him of being the kind of person who is kind of good at picking up just about anything and do it, and sometimes surprises in the way he does it.
Okay.
But I don't really mind which way we go, because obviously it can't be omnipotent, but it could be either that he does it mostly physically, that he comes in and shows off. He has perhaps great balance from working up there on the heights, and
I'm enjoying that concept. The idea that people might think he's a dumb musclehead, because he likes to jump out of planes, or he likes to I don't know, water ski, if that's much of a thing in the 1950s. Yeah. But in fact, he is an accomplished expert.
Yeah, he figures it out on the fly. He's quite smart at, okay, so that's how it works. Now, look at me, I'm doing this too, you know?
Well, I'm tempted to say mental first, but
yeah, me too.
Or what you could do is still go physical first, but when you look at favoured approach, look at the way he applies himself. Yeah. So, or vice versa. I think the way we're looking at the character now, it makes it more interesting to be mental primary, maybe physical, physical secondary, and social tertiary.
Yes.
And for your favoured approach to probably be resilience, because I think you put yourself through what you do through your pure resolve, and well, as the attributes are defined, your resolve, your stamina, and your composure. You don't let these things phase you. People have underestimated you all your life.
Yeah, it's grit and will that he decides, okay, now I can do this too. I'm gonna just throw myself in there and do it.
Yeah, I don't need a university education to tell me how to do this.
Exactly. Okay, that's really cool. So once again, what does that mean that I have this order? How do I assign the points for the attributes then?
So, your mental attributes are intellect, cunning, and resolve. They each have 1 dot in to begin. You also now have 6 dots to spread between them. Your physical attributes are might, dexterity, and stamina. They also start with a single dot in, and you have 4 dots to spread between them.
Yes.
And your social attributes of presence, manipulation, and composure start with 1 dot each, and you have 2 to spread between them. Now, from there, we have a favoured approach, which we've chosen as resilience, which is resolve, stamina, and composure. Each of those gains an additional dot. And then you finally have 1 last dot to assign wherever you see fit.
Great. Okay, cool. Then I'll make those a bit more specific as we go on, I suppose.
Lovely. So then we go on to trademarks. Now, trademarks are your signature moves, your specializations, the way you use your scenes, and your skills, your attributes to gain directorial control over a scene. Essentially, if you use your skill in the way that the trademark states, and your trademark can be as defined or as woolly as you like, but it's best to make it somewhere in the middle. If you use it, you get to roll 2 additional dice, and then if you succeed, you gain directorial control. And what directorial control is essentially you become the director, the narrator, or the GM, if you want, at that point to narrate exactly what happens next, what the alien does, what the evidence says. You start gaining control as the director, as the name implies, because effectively you have applied yourself in such a way as to divert the course of fate, divert the course of the plot. So trademarks aren't always used because they're often the descriptions can't be applied to every single situation, but when they are used and they're used successfully, they can be quite powerful. So as an example, we've got things like mind like a calculator, you can link it to intellect, swims like a fish linked to athletics, or always an excuse linked to larceny. And I believe we have a whole list of example trademarks later on in this chapter. So you can make them up, or you can choose the ones in this book. I'll give you some examples. For every man will gain 2 trademarks, and for being an everyman, and those include Mama Bear, Jack of all trades, I can fix this, I'm the manager, General Strike, got the groove, loaf in the oven, and get off my land. Now, some of them are more well-defined than others, but the kind of point of the game is to find interesting ways to use these trademarks. These are basically things you're known as. So to use Get Off My Land, that's a relatively simple one. If you're defending your land and you use Get Off My Land assigned to aim, you can say you're invoking it, you gain your 2 additional dice. If you use it and you succeed, congratulations, you get directorial control. Something like I can fix this, logical place to put it would be with technology. And so it goes. If you are feeling particularly creative, you can assign trademarks to skills or attributes that don't seem at all connected, and then it becomes a bit of a mental exercise for you as the player to choose how you're going to use it. But I leave that entirely up to you.
Well, those kinds of things, like Jack of all trades and I can fix this, sounds like something that would work nicely for someone who likes to pick up everything and being sure that he can do it.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so for G-Man, we have trademarks that include, this is totally my pay grade, man please step away from the alien, license and registration please, it was a dark and stormy night, cut through red tape, badge and gun, just a small town boy, and nothing to see here. So again, you would get 2 of those for being a G-Man.
Right. Yeah, I like the idea of he should be able to have this authority as an agent and be able to get people to sort of listen to him and to sort of do what he wants. So I think this license and registration piece kind of fits in there, that he can demand things from people and get them to do what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe assign that to... where would that be? Could that be connected to like
Probably
manipulation?
command, maybe? Yeah, it's likely you're going to be demanding that from someone. Although if you can find a different way of using it, kudos to you.
Yeah, and then cut through red tape looks exciting as well. I'm not sure exactly what to connect it to just yet, but I want to connect these with the social skills in some way, and sort of...
You can attach it to an attribute. So you could use cut through red tape with cunning, let's say, because it's a way you realise you can work your way around the bureaucracy. You could use it with manipulation for the same reason, or you could put it with persuasion, or maybe even empathy, because the idea of cutting through red tape is you're finding a shortcut, of course, to the end of a mystery or to get into a secret room or something like that. And if you're determined to use it with a social attribute or skill, those might be some good ones to use.
Yeah, no, but manipulation would be fun, I think. Cut through red tape. And
okay.
License and registration could then be, well, command.
Yep. So then we have our scientist, and trademarks include mental gymnast, the smartest person in the room, surgeon general, a taste for danger, high blood pressure, force of nature, streams of jargon, and seeing beauty in horror.
Well, I think the smartest person in the room certainly comes out straight away and sounds logically like it would go with intellect.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I would suggest, as an example, you would be using this when you prove that you're the smartest person in the room. So if you were to correct someone and then say, actually, it's this, you would be using the smartest person in the room, because everyone would say, oh, yeah, so he is.
Of course, I really like seeing beauty in horror, but I'm not sure how that can actually be beneficial, really, or what stat I could put it to.
Use it to seduce an alien, inadvertently or otherwise, being able to relate to an alien. If you had picked any empathy, I would say that seeing beauty in horror could work quite well with that. But likewise, you could attach it to something like persuasion, because you're trying to persuade others to see beauty in horror.
I mean, there's one I was thinking of if we could make them up. I did want to do something that linked to enigmas, implying I'm library, like I'm very good with books. Something like very well read. Yeah.
Yeah, so we could do something like speed reader, or read between the lines.
Yes, read between the lines. I like that. Read between the lines, that's for my enigma skill, and probably comes up whenever something to do with mystery solving involves in-depth reading.
Exactly.
Little bonus there. There we go. Well, there you go. There's two then. The smartest person in the room for intellect, and read between the lines, enigma.
So then we have our origin paths and our trademarks from there. So we have a life of privilege, so sticking with you, Craig. Some examples are I know what you want, I cannot tell a lie, big stick, desk jockey Bonaparte, and Professor Oddball. I can see which one you're probably going to go for. So this is how your character grew up, and a trademark that kind of relates to it, but again you can attach to a skill or attribute.
Interesting. I mean, I like the sound of Professor Oddball, but what exactly does that mean?
Well, it means whatever you want it to mean, but as an example, it can be that you are so eccentric and so out there that people are naturally intimidated by you.
I could link it to presence.
Exactly.
Oh, let's go with that one then. Yes, I am a tad eccentric, Professor Oddball. It's not that I'm going around wearing a silly hat. It's more that I'm quite abrasive to people and start ranting at them occasionally, and that does intimidate people sometimes. So let's say Professor Oddball for presence.
Excellent. And we also have our suburban in the form of our adventurer. Some trademarks here include not soft, deprogramming, gadgeteer, cultured warrior, a degree in what?
What is that? A degree in what?
So that would be you have some bizarre degree that no one else has heard of.
Okay. I thought it was more like, who cares about degrees? I can do this anyway. But those are more like the early ones that we did. I also saw something like improvised melee massacre.
Oh, let's see, improvised melee massacre. That is in the game. Let's see where it is. I don't know whether we have that as a trope. Or as a... No, that is a trademark. We do have that down, and that is down as an adventurer trademark. So yeah, that's moving on to your ambition. But by all means, have that as your adventurer trademark, if you like. And this could... By no means does this have to be a trademark that your character has used before. This can be something they discover they have the capacity to use during the course of the story.
Right. So how many do I choose?
So you choose 2 for your archetype, 1 for
Yeah.
your origin, 1 for your ambition.
Right. Okay. Great. So that could be for my ambition, as in the origin, and then we'd have the jack of all trades, and I can fix this for the archetype, and then for the suburban origin. Yes. What did we say here again?
So the suburban origin, we have a few options. Such as not soft, as in, despite your upbringing, you're not soft. That works for you. Deprogramming would generally imply that you have shown a resilience to brainwashing or, let's say, state education or religious education. Gadgeteer, you can get anything to work. Cultured warrior would be a strange fit for you, actually, because you are, in a sense, a warrior in the form of being an adventurer, and you're cultured in the way that you're not educated, but you have found culture for yourself. So that would work as an interesting... you could almost use it for whenever you're making a culture roll or a persuasion roll or something like that to show, oh, hang on, this guy isn't what he seems.
Yeah, exactly. That fits perfectly. Fun.
Okay. And we also have our G-Man Street Rat.
Yes, and larceny is the skill that I want to connect to. The quickness of the hand deceives the mind.
Okay, that was nice and easy. So that just leaves us with ambition, and we've already ascertained that BC's is going to be from the adventurer origin path, which we moved to ambition for this character, of improvised melee massacre. Which I like, it's not what a lot of people go for because it sounds so utterly violent. The word massacre does that. But I think it could make for an interesting scene. So that just leaves us with our scientist and our G-Man.
Indeed. So what do you think for me? I have an idea, but I'm interested in something maybe you think could be fun. Considering out for revenge.
Yeah, talent for destruction is the obvious choice, I would say, based on the options listed.
I was thinking that one, and I was thinking that makes sense to tie to science, but...
Yeah, but we could go for something a little different, and go for Party Crasher. Now, Party Crasher you could actually use as, there is something in particular you want to disrupt. Let's imagine your character is a scientist, but someone has attempted to discredit him. Maybe he has been drummed out of some scientific institution, NASA, for instance, in its early stage. And so you are determined to not only prove them wrong, but prove them wrong on the grandest stage of them all. So we could tie this into the plot of the game, where maybe in the next town over they're holding some great seminar to award your rival in the laboratory the medal for scientific excellence, and you're determined to trump his achievement.
I like that a lot. What could we link that to then?
Let's think. Probably, I know you've already linked something to presence. You could link it to something you wouldn't expect, like might, or maybe manipulation. If you're looking at skills, science, again, would work quite nicely, because after all, you're looking to show other people up with your excellent use of science.
Yes, maybe it should be science, because then because I have one for intellect, so maybe one for science, which is one of my high skills, would be good. So let's do that. I am a party crasher in a scientific...
And out of interest, what kind of scientist are you? in terms of the three main fields of science being biology, chemistry, and physics.
I think, even though I wanted to do all of them, I think realistically, let's say physics. I am a physicist.
And you didn't take any dots in medicine, did you?
I did not.
No, so biologists probably wouldn't work out very well. Okay, so that just leaves us with our G-Man, and you wanted to go for family, if I recall, family man.
Yes, and I like this. We have ways of making you talk, and I was thinking to link that with empathy.
I'm sure you're going to be a delightful father with we have ways of making you talk.
Indeed. And I just wanted to go back maybe to archetype again, and I was thinking badge and gun, and then connecting that with aim rather than cutting through the red tape.
Oh, I like that. You could use it almost as a distraction, you know? Essentially, these trademarks are flexible. And if you were to narrate the use of it and say badge and gun, if you flash your badge before firing it, it almost gives you the drop on your opponent. It's the police use of freeze, hands up, and that at which point you open fire because you don't give a damn. It's the 1950s. They're probably communists.
Most likely. Yes.
Okay, I think that actually sums up trademarks. So relationships are a nice, easy part which we can summarize in about 3 minutes, if not fewer. And it's how your characters connect to each other. So this is something we haven't talked about yet, but it's something worth coming back to. Essentially, in a 3-player game, each character is going to have 2 relationships on their sheet, and it's going to be the other 2 characters. And one of them will have a rank of 2, one of them will have a rank of 1. These are the intensity of the relationship. And the definition of the relationship is where it gets important, because as long as you are acting in a way that relationship is defined, you gain that intensity's worth of dice when rolling. So, for instance, if BC has an intensity 2 relationship with scientist, and it's, let's say BC's relationship with him is resentment, for instance. If you are acting in a way where your character resents what he is doing, then excellent, BC gains 2 additional dice because of that relationship. It essentially encourages players to play the characters in the way that they've built the party. So you don't have to come up with this right now. You can think about this. This is almost that's usually the last step, because the last thing we have beyond that, and there's some various things we can choose after this, like tropes and connections that go beyond the game itself, or beyond the immediate party itself. The last thing we do is draw quips. So I'm going to explain to you what quips do. Quips are your one-liners, your award-winning moments, the quotes that you make that will be put into the trailer of the movie. And when you use your quips, you gain an advantage. You often turn to quips at the worst possible moment, or the best possible moment. They don't have to be appropriate, they just have to be entertaining. And when you use them, you get to roll additional dice, if the rest of the players believe it was an appropriate, or entertaining, I should say, use of the quip. Simple as that. So in the most simplistic terms, you roll 2 additional dice if they have voted that the quip was entertaining, and then you get to do something. You get to either retain that quip and add a new one to your selection, or spend that quip and purchase the use of a cinematic for free, effectively. And so I'm going to explain to the listeners what cinematics are very quickly. Cinematics, in They Came From Beneath the Sea, are meta powers. These are powers that the players wield, not the characters. And it's the players wielding them in the role of producer, if you like, over the movie, over the game that's being told. These cinematics range everywhere from inserting deleted scenes, so that if you forgot to do something in a previous scene, you can go back in time and do it again. Maybe you forgot to ask that vital question or pick up your gun from the drawer before you left your office. You can insert a deleted scene, that's I think a 3-point cinematic, and go back and do it. Likewise, you can insert a missing reel, a missing scene. If it looks like doom is approaching, 3-point cinematic is missing scene, it cuts to black, your characters move forward into the future. They can never refer to what just happened because they will never know what just happened. All we know is there's a missing reel there, it cut to black, they survived it. They can make vague allusions to what happened, but they can never know for sure. There's less powerful ones, such as, let's see, killing the extra. So if your character is about to meet their death, or just about to be shot simply, or stabbed, or something like that, you can redirect the damage to poor Angus standing next to you, who was just an extra, with a single name, had no speaking parts. You're almost obliged to hold that character and go, "No, Angus," when they're dying in your arms, and probably swear justice for his death. But the point being, you have these cinematic powers. Usually, in order to pay for cinematics, you need to use something called rewrites. And this is about as complex as the game gets. Every time you fail, you gain a rewrite in the rewrite pool. So every time you fail a dice roll, and you can choose to fail, you gain 1 rewrite in the writer's pool. Cinematics cost a number of rewrites to activate. Or, if you successfully use a quip, the cinematic is free. It is as simple as that. I will be keeping a tally of the number of rewrites the party starts with. They start with 3 at the beginning, and how many they go on to have during the course of the game will depend on how many times they fail at their dice rolls. They need to roll 8s and above to succeed. But that is the I guess, crunchiest part of the game, but it's also the very interesting mechanical side of the game. Now, to go back to quips. In They Came From Beneath the Sea as traditionally written, quips are often quite fun. They're quite silly. They range from everything from, let's see, I'll find the list now. They range from, "It's time we put the I in survival," or "Sorry if I parted your scales too close," or "I've smoked worse things in my pipe," through to "Something tells me those aren't antennae," to "Wake me when the world is saved," that sort of thing. It's very B-movie-esque. Our game isn't going to be quite as farcical as that. I have my own list for another version of They Came From Beneath the Sea that I'm currently working on, which is more horrific in sensibility, provisionally titled They Came From Beyond the Stars. We're still going to be going for the aquatic theme in this game. But what I'm going to ask our players to do at this point is roll some dice, and I will assign to them from the different quip lists based on their archetype the quips that they end up with. So we're going to start with you, Craig. Could you roll for me let's think, we'll roll 2d10, please.
I rolled a 2 and a 7.
Okay, then. So I'm just adding those together. So your first quip, you'll want to note this down, is "Do what you want with them, just please leave me alone."
Do what you want with them, just leave me alone.
If you could roll 2d10 again, please, Craig.
Certainly.
If you get another 9 in total, I will just adjust by one or the other.
That is a 7 in total.
This quip is "This is God."
Very interesting.
And one more time, please.
That's a 7 again.
Okay, I'm going to adjust it by 1, which leaves you with a very interesting "Krn ia schlenguato."
Yes, I see where we're coming from now.
If you can find an entertaining point at which your character would use that,
I shall keep it in mind.
I would suggest that your characters don't until they have encountered something that would suitably break their mind, but by all means, if you want to build it into their backstory that they're cultists, you can do so. Hjalmar, if you could roll your 2d10, please.
We got 6.
So on your everyman, 6 is "Flun a drol klei jog sothoth."
Sounds Dutch.
Yeah, it does a bit, doesn't it? Okay, roll 2d10 again, please.
13.
13 is we have entered hell.
Nice.
We're definitely getting some tone here already.
Yeah. It's gone a bit Event Horizon at this point.
Yes. 11.
Please help me, Daddy.
Okay.
So yeah, what was once a fun and light-hearted game has suddenly turned quite desperate.
Yes.
Mattiaz, we have your G-Man to go.
All right. I'll begin rolling, and I get 6 and a 7, so that's 13.
13 is give yourself to them.
All right.
You could still use that in a G-Man capacity, you know.
That's right.
Kind of.
Kind of, yeah. That's true.
It's not quite turn yourself over to the police.
Give yourself to them. All right. Okay. Next up, I get a 9.
9, we're all going to die.
Nice.
Yeah. I can see that will probably get some use.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get a 15.
Oh, lovely. Okay. 15 is Kek Nok Terran Shatha.
Terran Shatha. All right.
So, just to remind you, if you use your quips in a way that the rest of the group believe is entertaining, or horrifying in this game, you get to use a cinematic for free, or you get to not only keep this quip, but take another quip later. You get to roll 2 additional dice if your quip is voted a good use of a quip. So, usually you would pair it with a dice roll. You don't have to, and you will still get the benefit, you just won't get the 2 additional dice, quite simply. Make sense?
For now, mostly yes.
So, is it associated with something we do? Is it associated with is it associated with an action, or is it just something you could pull out the bag?
If you associate with an action, you'll get your 2 additional dice. If you don't, you can still use it, and you can still purchase a cinematic for free for later use. So either way, it is workable. It's just, I guess, it's most effective if you're about to roll some dice as well. So, for instance, you're about to shoot something and you shout, "This is God," referring to your pistol, and or the bullet. Then you get to add an additional 2 dice to your aim roll. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. So, going back to the idea of cinematics and the fact that we've just suddenly veered down a rather dark turn of They Came From Beneath the Sea. Those cinematics are still in play. I'm not going to introduce any new ones for the course of this game because you've not played with the old ones yet. But the way you play them is slightly different. Because you, as players, aren't producers in this game like you could be considered in They Came From Beneath the Sea. You are, for all intents and purposes, great old ones. The use of your cinematics is your godlike powers. You are, for some reason or other, playing with, toying with, or protecting your chosen vessels. Are they going to be your avatars? Are they going to be your high priests at some point? Have you selected some great fate for them? Maybe they're just bound to be sacrificed in your name. But when you do things like kill the extra now, you aren't doing it for comedic effect. You are intentionally getting in the way of the bullet and redirecting it towards some hapless bystander. Your character may start losing their mind if things like this keep happening, because they'll become aware that there is some divine, to use probably the wrong term for great old ones, force intervening on their behalf. Now when you insert a deleted scene and go back in time, those characters are, for all intents and purposes, going back in time and repeating that scene. When you are inserting a missing scene, they will black out. They will have no explanation for what has just happened and for how they've moved forward in time and space, beyond the fact that the great old ones are intervening, as they may become aware.
So very disturbing for them when these things happen. When any cinematic happens, it would mess with your mind.
Yeah, and this is the difference between They Came From Beneath the Sea in its traditional incarnation, but it's easily adjusted to this horrific incarnation, where pawns on the chessboards of the gods, if they ever become aware that they are pawns, it will break their minds, because in the Call of Cthulhu style, man is not meant to know what exists out in the void. And you three exist out in the void.
Can I just say, I absolutely love it.
That sounds great. Nice and grim.
So now we're going to be looking at tropes. Tropes are a fun little feature that archetypes have. They are powers that characters start play with. Each character starts with 3 tropes, and each, we'll start with the Everyman, in fact. And do you have the Chapter 2 open, each of you? Because if not, now's the time to do it. This is where the tropes get detailed in full. And tropes aren't, or they sometimes are, but they don't tend to be mechanical benefits. Some of them are like, add +2 dice to this kind of roll, and that's a trope that's designed for a player who likes that kind of mechanical crunch. Some of them are incredibly narrative heavy, and we'll go into some of those as we go on. So, for example, looking at the Everyman, as we have an Everyman in the group, I will read out some of the tropes as examples, and by all means you don't need to pick the ones I've read out for you, because there's quite a few here.
Mm-hmm.
The top one, grit and determination. You never let not knowing a thing stop you. With a little grit and determination, you can rise to the challenge. Roll 1 extra die on actions that are outside of your character's archetype. So, in other words, anything you're doing, any of your skills that aren't within your Everyman bracket, you gain additional dice on. So now you can kind of start to see the importance of where you're putting those dots at character creation. We also have things like an honest day's wage. You aren't rich, but you seem to always have money on hand and ready whenever the situation requires it. You can always bribe incidental characters or pick up whatever gear or items you need as long as it makes sense. The director is the final arbiter of what makes sense. So that's a more narrative power. And then we have something like picket line. You've worked the line before, so you've been on a strike, and you know what it takes to crack a company. Roll 1 extra die on actions in which you lead others against an opponent more powerful than your group. And that can be as grandiose, as nebulous as you like. But each character starts play with 3 tropes. The Everyman chooses 2 from the Everyman list and 1 from any of the other archetypes. So, or can actually be from the Everyman list if you want, but I prefer for it to be from one of the others. It makes the characters more interesting. So, what are we looking at for BC here out of these tropes? What appeals to you?
Well, I do like the first you read there, the grit and determination about not knowing,
I know, it's a complex double negative, isn't it? You never let not knowing a thing stop you.
Exactly. He genuinely believes that he can do anything if he just rises to the challenge, like you said there, and yes, gets an extra die on rolling things that are outside of the archetype, and those would be the skills then that I have not put as my archetype skills.
Exactly.
Yes. All right, so I'd like to go with that one. And then I found honesty is the best policy, which I could read too. You've learned that people respond best when you lay it all out, even if they don't want to hear it. Gain 1+ enhancement to shifting attitudes in a social situation if you tell the complete truth.
So enhancements are what makes your dice rolls, your challenges, easier or more difficult. You have enhancements and you have complications. And a +1 enhancement essentially makes the grade of difficulty 1 less, despite the fact it's a +1. So gain +1 enhancements, shifting attitudes in a social situation if you tell the complete truth, means if you're being honest with people, you're going to find it slightly easier to convince them of what you're trying to tell them.
Cool. And yeah, maybe he'll have to go about that the hard way sometimes, that he's first trying to say the wrong thing and then trying to say the right thing.
Exactly.
But did you have any other in mind for that character? Or
well,
what do you think?
We'll get to that in a sec, because we'll go through the other ones, and then what I'll do is circle back round to you and see whether you've picked a third one from the G-Man, or the or indeed the scientist, the survivor, or the mouth. I'll let you look through the rest of the tropes in this chapter and see what you come up with. One thing I will say just before I move on we'll go on to Mattiaz and Agent Faulkner very shortly, is every archetype has a nemesis. Nemesis is one of your alien brackets. There's 5 alien brackets. So you have your destroyers, your enslavers, your invaders, spies, and primordials. There's lots of aliens within each bracket. Now, the everyman gains 1 additional die on all mental-based rolls against primordials. Both of them essentially act as the blue collar, the very basest of creatures in their chosen society. So everyman can outthink a primordial, because every man's got common sense. However, primordials gain 1 additional die on all mental-based rolls against everyman, because they're fairly evenly challenged. So a physical or social roll between the two of them is dice neutral. You gain no modifiers, no disadvantages, but if you're trying to do a mental roll against each other, you start rolling additional dice. It's one of those things that's worth noting down. It helps you in to use a reference from another game, looking at D&D or Pathfinder, rangers have favoured enemies. In this game you have favoured enemies as well, or unfortunately it works the other way round as well, because you have a least favoured enemy, because they gain advantages against you. So, moving on to the G-Man.
Yes.
We have a few interesting tropes here. I'll read out a couple again, and you can tell me, out of the list, which 2 from the G-Man list you want, and don't tell me the 3rd one from another list you want just yet. So, as example, if you have Disappearing Act, you've been trained how to lose a tail, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. You can disappear into a crowd as small as 10 people and somehow lose any tail that might be following you. There's also Sunglasses. It's all about the look. Gain +1 enhancement when interrogating someone. Nice and simple. So, what are you thinking?
So, it's really interesting that you picked those two, because when I've been looking at the tropes again, and I really like particularly those two. Disappearing Act. I think that given, the larceny part of what I have, I think being able to disappear is something that both makes sense that my character is able to do, and will probably come quite in handy. And then Sunglasses. Interrogating someone is, of course, an interesting way of putting it. Would it be specifically in an interrogation room type situation, or can a conversation where you're trying to get information also qualify as an interrogation?
I think so. I think you could use it. And again, I mentioned it before, but part of the fun of this game is its flexibility. If you can find an interesting way to use your trope, do it, and I'm not going to stand in the way.
Then Sunglasses it is.
I'm going to read one more of these because I find it a lot of fun. It's An Inside Job. It's been you this whole time. In a scene in which your character isn't present, you can declare that your character is actually masquerading as another minor character. I like that Gene Parmesan idea of, ripping off a mustache and it's been you there all along. So, your nemesis is you gain 1 additional die on all physical-based rolls made against alien spies. You know how to tackle them, you know how to bring them down. However, spies gain an additional die on all mental-based rolls against G-Men. So, we have the mouth as well. We don't have any mouths in this group, so I will skip that. But by all means, both of you have a look at the tropes available for the mouth, because you may want to pick one from that list. We have the scientist now. And the scientist tropes, to read a couple out again. Weird science. You aren't even sure what it does. Roll 1 extra die on actions when you are using an alien device, even when you lack any familiarity with it. And the one I think everyone has picked on every single game I've ran of this involving a scientist. Atomic power. You have a single item that is nuclear powered. When used in combat, it has the deadly tag. Otherwise, it provides +1 enhancement when used for a specific function. It doesn't specify what it is that's atomic powered. That's up to you. So, what are you thinking, Craig?
Well, the atomic one does sound very fun, but also perhaps a little more for a game where we're being a bit more like, my cane is atomically powered.
Yep.
So instead, I've decided to go for Eureka, which is very good at putting clues together and figuring out the bigger picture. In-depth understanding of a clue once a session, and I read a little bit of how investigation and clues work, so that sounds good to me.
Yep.
I'm also going to go with outside funding, which means I can get the money sometimes when it's needed.
Yeah, as it says in the description, no to trash bags, yes to laser death rays.
Exactly. And my one pick from another group will be from the Survivor. Seen too much. You see, I've had, well, the incident in my life that occurred was quite traumatic. Also, I have lived in Britain most of my life till I came to America, and so that means I have been alive for both World War I and World War II. I was not involved in either, being too young for World War I and my injury, World War II, but I was in Britain, and obviously there were quite some terrible things that occurred during the last 30, 40 years, so I have seen some unpleasant things.
And that means you get to roll 1 extra die to resist mental or social influences.
Indeed. I'm stern of will.
Exactly. And the nemesis for the scientist is they gain 1 additional die on all social-based rolls against invaders. Invaders gain additional die on physical-based rolls against scientists. So in other words, scientists, despite how antisocial they often are in these games, tend to be able to talk invaders down, but they don't want to get in a fight with one. I think most humans would probably agree with that. So going back round to Hjalmar, have you picked your 3rd trope, and from which list?
I have now been looking through the different tropes and the lists, and one that I do like is the one from the mouth, Spotlight. You thrive when you are the center of attention. It may annoy your friends, but really you are just that good. Roll 1 extra die when you are in the front and center of the action.
Perfect. That suits your character down to a T, I'd say.
Yes, I think so too.
And that just leaves Agent Faulkner.
Yes. And I think that it would make a lot of sense to have this secret bunker from the Survivor.
The Survivor does have some fun tropes.
They definitely do, and having a safe house available when needed is something I believe can be very, very useful. I had one question with regards to that, actually. Is this simply a location that is safe, or is it also a location that has some supplies in it, for example, or is that something, again, where flexibility comes in?
It's something where flexibility comes in as long as it's reasonable to the degree of the genre we're playing in at the time you suggest it. So the way it's written is going to ground is your speciality. You have bunkers and safe houses all over. No matter where you are, you have a safe space to fall back to in a time of need. You cannot be followed there. So this isn't something where the rest of the party can join you. This is something that only you can access. So I would assume it's a government highly classified, highly secure facility even the scientists wouldn't get into. In fact, they'd probably turn him away on the spot. So how much that has in it will depend on where we describe it as being. If it's like a nuclear bunker, fit for one person, then it's probably got some tins and liquids in and enough so that you could live by yourself for a few years without fear of radiation poisoning. But if you're near a government facility, we can actually say it's an extension of that, and you'll probably have access to arms and armaments as well.
That would actually be quite interesting. I think this will work. This will be interesting, and it might help explain sort of what I'm doing in this location and the connection with the rest of the rest of the government.
Well, it's actually quite a lot of fun trying to pair these tropes with the other archetypes. Because the secret bunker is a survivor archetype, most people would assume a survivor secret bunker would be that kind of out in the woods, hatch leading 20 feet into the ground, and you've got a concrete bunker filled with your bare supplies. But yeah, as soon as you start associating it with a scientist, let's say, or with a G-man, then it starts getting quite interesting, even with a mouth for that matter, because you'd assume there's going to be lots of TV monitors in there and maybe even a broadcast station, that sort of thing.
Yeah. What would they need specifically coming from another archetype?
Yeah. So I think that's all of it done in terms of your tropes. The only part of character creation we are omitting for this character creation session is the connections stage, which you don't have to do at character creation. You can, in fact, do at later on in the game. This is how your character's paths connect to the world around them. It gives you contacts, allies, people in various positions in, let's say, government, in private industry, the neighbourhood, and so on, that you can call on for aid. And at its basis, it gives you dice modifiers, enhancements in certain areas and around certain people, because people are more inclined to lend a hand. But likewise, it can start populating the world with an interesting cast. What we're going to be doing is approaching this story as if these characters are brand new, and maybe even as if they don't know the environment they're in, they don't know this town. This means that we can form the connections on the go and introduce that mechanic as the game goes on. The other thing, and this isn't something done at character creation, but I'll explain it for the listeners, is the only powers we haven't covered in this are stunts. Everything else has been covered. Everything else you have access to in this game has been covered. But stunts have not. And just to explain what stunts are, they are immediate reflex powers. When you activate a stunt, which is listed in the book, you can basically use the power as it is stated in the book. What a stunt might be is if you have succeeded on a dice roll by 3 more dice than you needed to, then you can activate a 3-point stunt to enhance your action in the way the stunt implies. Simple as that. And some of them are like daredevil stunts where you can, let's say, vault a canyon on a bicycle. Others might be more scientific. They might be tied to various archetypes. The reason we're not going into them in detail is because the best use of stunts is when all players can read them, are at least passingly familiar with them, and this is something I think the 3 players will want to look through the stunt list between sessions, get a feel in their mind of the kind of stunts they're going to be inclined to take, and then make some notes. One thing I suggest to all players if they came from Beneath the Sea is it's a game that is very strong when you have visual cues. So, for instance, if you have your quips written on a piece of paper or on cards in front of you, so even if you're playing over audio like we are, just having them as flashcards in front of you reminds you to use them. Same with cinematics. What I often do when I'm playing these kinds of games is I will have a JPEG. Rather than having the Word document, I'll have a JPEG open where I have just divided it into a grid with lots of different cinematics noted down on their points beneath them. And so I know I can always call on them very, very quickly. So if you're visually cued like I am, that can help a great deal. And having stunts in a table or some other visually appealing manner is useful. But at this point, we won't deal with them. That'll come later in the game. So, with that said, do any of the players have any questions about their characters?
At this point, I think we've made some really nice progress here, and I've got a general idea of most of the things that he can and can't do, and what he thinks he can do, which is everything.
Yeah, that sounds about right, given how you've summed up your character.
Yes.
We'll see how that holds up as the game goes on.
Yes, I feel confident in who I am, and already some backstory stuff is in mind. Of course, I shall send that to you privately, Matthew, but for now I think I know who I am enough to at least begin with this character.
I think we can assume the scientist is a traitor at this point. Out of
Yes,
interest.
okay, conspiracy coming.
Subtle. And we don't actually have a name for the scientist yet, so what is the scientist's name?
Dr. Charles White, or Dr. White to all of you lot.
So the other part of the system that we'll be changing in this playthrough, in typical Lovecraftian fashion, and I'll deal with it now, is in They Came From Beneath the Sea, you only have 5 levels of injury. 1 is uninjured, so treat that as if that's what you're on from the very start. Then, after you've incurred 3 injuries, you have just a flesh wound. You're scratched, bruised, otherwise superficially hurt. Once you have 3 injuries and just a flesh wound, all dice pools that fall within your character's archetype gain 1 die. Simple as that. Because in this game, the more injured you get, the more dramatic you get. It's like a movie, where if a character is walking through a war zone, as soon as they start getting battle scarred, they start amping up. You know, they're suddenly more heroic.
Yeah. Desperation kicks in.
Yeah, exactly. The next level is That'll Leave a Scar. Once you have 3 injuries and That'll Leave a Scar, all dice pools that fall within the character's archetype gain 2 dice. Then the next level is Last Ditch Effort. Once you've taken 3 injuries there, you can't take much more, but you might have enough for 1 more push. All dice pools involving the character's archetype gain 2 dice. Further, for any archetype-defined rolls, you can choose to push your luck. Basically, that means you run the risk of dying if you fail. You trigger a death scene. But the target number is 7 rather than 8 for successes. So, after Last Ditch Effort, you have 1 level of health left. Don't forget me. And you only have 1 injury for that. You have 1 last gasp inside you. Once you get 1, you get 1 action. And the dice pool for that action gains 3 dice, whatever that dice pool is, and your target number is 7. After the roll, success or failure, you trigger a death scene. And that can be as elongated and dramatic as you see fit, but you should definitely make it interesting. So the idea being, as mentioned, the closer to death you get in character in this game, you gain dice. It compels you, encourages you to take risks and put your character at the forefront of danger, because it's the only way you will gain things. Now, as I mentioned, the Lovecraftian element. Well, there always has to be an insanity mechanic, doesn't there, when we're dealing with Cthulhu? And while these aren't strictly labelled at this point, you can essentially treat it as having 5 levels of sanity, or 5 levels before absolute, irrevocable breakdown. And for all intents and purposes, it works exactly the same way. With the Just a Flesh Wound, That'll Leave a Scar, Last Ditch Effort, and Don't Forget Me. But this is going to be mental strain. And ultimately, if you break finally, you can say that your mind has opened to the cosmos if you're feeling generous, or you can just say your mind has sunk into the void and it will never be recovered if you're not. So you can die mentally in this game just as you can die physically. Okay?
Alright.
So
yes.
you don't just have physical injuries to worry about. If you get exposed to, let's say, a Shoggoth in the first session, you won't, but if you did, that will, for all intents and purposes, more likely than not, give you 3 injuries to your mental track and give you just a flesh wound. Your mind is starting to break. Shoggoth's probably a bad example, because they're probably going to give you a few more than 3 injuries mentally, but you get the gist of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Certainly.
So it's a different way of treating the sanity that's present in most Cthulhu-based games. Okay then, so that means I think we are ready to give our preview of Episode 1. Our characters are, for one reason or other, as we will ascertain, assembled in a small town in Alabama. Alabama isn't known for its coastal resorts, isn't known for its welcoming presence to outsiders even, especially in the 1950s. It's in fact known as a bit of a culturally reticent part of the state when it comes to civil progress. But here you are, all 3 of you. One of you may be native to the area. I'm specifically looking at BC as a potential there.
Alright.
I'm thinking also that our government agent is down in Alabama, in this town called Denton, for governmental reasons. Or maybe he's just taking a furlough, maybe he's just taking a break and getting away from the big city. He's been working in DC too long and he's got family down in Denton. Family he very rarely sees. It tied into his ambition of being a family man, reconnecting with what he was or what he wants to be. Then we have our scientist. We have Dr. White. And does he have a lab down in Denton, or is he down here to experiment on something or research something in this town? I'm leaving this up to you. Those are teasers, they're suggestions. I turn it to you, the players. Give me a reason why you might be in Denton. On the southern coast, there's a tiny bit of southern coast of Alabama that overlooks the Gulf of Mexico, and this is where Denton is. You tell me why each of your characters is there, starting with Dr. White. And give as much information as you see fit, because there may be some things you don't want the other players to know.
Of course. Well, for now, I think it's safe to say that I would rather not be here at all. What could a place like this truly offer someone with my mental ability? A backwater town, but there are things about the new world that are better than the old. That's why I have come. In this case, the area has some great potential for further scientific study, primarily in the space near the town of Denton. A lot of wide space, interesting conditions for experimentation. Specifically in the weather in the region, I'm intrigued by the potential of the storms. I have some weather experiments that could be well conducted in this part of the world. So for now, I'm here. We shall see how things go. If it is not suitable for my needs, I shall be moving on to somewhere else.
Very good. And what about BC?
My dad is sick. He's got something, we don't really know what it is. He's lying in bed most of the time. And, well, I had to come down from New York to, from my work on the skyscrapers to be with the family for a little while. And, hopefully he'll get better. We don't know. The doctors don't know what's going on with him. But he seems to have trouble talking and expressing himself, so now I'm here.
And what about Agent Faulkner?
Well, my folks live here. We came to Alabama after leaving Oklahoma behind, and they've been working the fruit fields here. They've fortunately gotten away from that now, but yes, I'm here seeing them, taking some time away from the crazy life in Washington, from all the backstabbing and all the politicking over at the FBI office there.
Very good. Well, in typical fashion, you start your session in a pub, in a bar. Why not? Jimmy's Bar and Grill. And there's a jukebox. It's hammering out some Jerry Lee Lewis. Great Balls of Fire. It's all the rage. All the kids are dancing to it. Not today, though. This bar is for older gentlemen, people like yourself. The kids don't hang around this kind of establishment. They're a little too progressive. They go down to the drive-in. They like the disco, such as it is, emerging. And it's quiet. The music isn't really stirring anything up. The air is thick with smoke. Jimmy himself operates the bar, as he always has done. A few of you know him, or a couple of you know him, just from time spent down here before. You've never known anyone else to run a bar as efficiently as Jimmy. He doesn't brook any violence in this place, and little of it comes here. Everyone knows each other. Everyone's a good old boy. Everyone knows the town and respects the bar, almost as much as they respect the church. You will find yourselves there after a hard day at work or a hard day with your family. I imagine a couple of you are escaping those same families, given, in the case of Agent Faulkner, you don't get to spend much time with them, and perhaps that's a good thing. In the case of BC, well, it's so difficult seeing your dad so ill, you just need to get out and get a cold beer. In the case of Dr. White, well, again, you'd rather not be in a stinking flea pit like this, but a drink's a drink. It may not be British beer, but it might take the edge off.
Yeah, and I'm seeing people I know mostly all around, being back home, and I feel I'm trying to talk to them and trying to tell them what the cool things that I'm doing back in New York, but they're they know me. They know I'm always trying to stir up something, and they are hard to impress these days because they just think I'm a bit too much for this town. I'm trying to talk to Jimmy at the bar, saying that, well, you gotta, stick with the times. You see, you're gonna be left behind when the disco is coming up, and get some new music in here.
Well, I can't say I know as much about that, Benny Clyde. This Jerry Lee Lewis is, I don't know. Seems ungodly the way he twists his hips and sings the way he does.
But it's the new times. Have you ever been to a dance now recently?
Well, maybe for young folks like you. We have a dance hall in town, opens up once every 2 weeks. Don't get folks like this down here. If you want to go out there, you fill your boots, but Jimmy's Bar and Grill stays open for the old-timers.
And I'm thinking to myself that I'm not even interested in looking down at the old dance hall, It's even there, they're falling behind with the times. Even when they're trying to play something new, people don't know how to dance to it.
Hell, I didn't want this jukebox. It was my daughter that asked for me to install it. We were fine enough with live music. But of course people move on from small towns like this to find their fortune in the big cities.
And I have a sip and I think to myself, well, thank God they do.
Anyway, what's a city boy like you doing down here?
Well, I don't know if you heard, but Dad has come down with some stuff. I don't know. He's been in bed now for 3 weeks.
I heard your pops had come down with something. I thought it was coming down with the gout again. Is it worse than that?
There's something else. He keeps coughing up stuff. Well, it's not right. It's something the doctors don't know what it is.
Oh, hell. Maybe he's got consumption. Happens to a lot of people who work in and around the swamp.
Yeah.
It's the humidity.
Yeah.
Hell, I ain't more proud of anything than I am, he slaps the air conditioner, than I am of this.
Yeah.
Paid a pretty penny for it too, but it keeps the air in here fresh, he says, through the thick cloud of yellow smoke.
And I look up at the air conditioner, struggling and rumbling along there on the wall, and I nod somewhat approvingly of him trying to adjust to things and get something new happening.
That's because my daughter says we gotta civilize this place, but I don't know. This is an old town with old people, old traditions.
Well, she knows what she's talking about. I mean, she's always been a bright mind.
If I didn't know you better, BC, I'd say you were angling to court her.
Hey now, hey. We only went out to dance, I'm telling you. There's nothing else, just a dance.
Oh, hey, I'm modern enough to know what you girls and boys get up to up at Makeout Point. Believe me, I know. Just don't you be doing nothing stupid, you hear?
Yeah. Yes, sir. I hear you.
Further down the bar, a couple of the good old boys, dungaree wearers, having a bit of a giggle about Agent Faulkner, who still hasn't pried himself out of his city slicker suits.
That's right, and I've positioned myself at, I suppose there's tables at the back of the bar somewhere. I've come to this place to escape Washington, to see my family, but I'm sitting here with a drink and I've got the newspaper, and I'm reading about the world falling together, about all these old colonies leaving, about, what year is it?
This will be about 1953.
1953. Right, so yes, then I'm reading about these civil wars and about, how the dominoes are starting to fall here, how communism is taking over, and I'm genuinely worried, and maybe it's the alcohol that's making it worse. But
Hey, Hoover boy!
What?
One of the good old boys from the bar shouts over to you.
I look up.
What you investigating?
I take up a cigarette and I light it. I'm learning about the world. Do you read the paper? You seeing what's going on? You seeing what's happening?
Heck yes, I can read. What you trying to say?
Well, I'm just saying you should be worried. There's communists out there, you know.
Oh, we don't talk about them kinds in this bar, Hoover boy. Ain't no communists in Alabama.
No, that's what I'm here to make sure that it stays that way.
You here investigating communists?
Well, I think I'm always on the lookout for them. But no, I'm here for my folks.
Heck, ain't no communist in Alabama. And they have a good old giggle at the bar. Sounds to me like you're wasting our tax dollars. Sending boys like you down to our town looking for pinkos.
Well, the government knows more than you. Let us just put it that way. But regardless, that is not really why I'm here. But I am on the lookout, so watch yourself.
He stands up from the bar and kicks the stool backwards. You say that again, Hoover boy.
And I just sit down and I look at him calmly.
I look up from my drink. What's he talking about?
You recognise Billy Bob. He's always been a bit of an irascible old salt fisherman off the coast usually, but by his age you doubt he gets out in his boat very often these days. I'll tell you what he's on about. He's accusing me of being some kind of god-forsaken communist.
Come on now, Billy Bob. I'm sure he didn't mean it that way.
I've worked these waters ever since I was a boy. I always paid my tax dollar to the man, even when I didn't like him. I didn't vote for this government, but there it is. I certainly ain't no pinko.
What have you been up to lately, anyways? How have things been? How's the business?
Say what? The business?
Yeah, fishing business, right?
You come down here with that city talk. You ain't from around here no more, are you?
Well...
Business is a lifestyle. It's my life. The fishing, I can't do it no more, can I? The fish is dried up.
What do you mean?
They've all gone. They've moved on. Pastures new, as they say. I tried moving to new spots. Competition around here is fierce. Something fierce. I don't know, wait for them to come back, I guess. I'm alright. I build up a little bit of a nest egg, but still. Less fish than they was, and the ones I am dredging up ain't too healthy at that.
Well, that's a damn shame.
Damn right it is.
Good to hear you got something else going on. You thinking of moving on to something else?
Me, my age? Hell, I'm in my 50s. I ain't moving on anywhere but down from Denton.
During this whole time, all this conversation going on, people getting out of chairs and back in again, I've just been impassively watching, sipping what I hope is a brandy. It's what I ordered. Whether or not it is another case entirely, I imagine.
Some kind of moonshine, I imagine. Whether they're actually serving actual brandy in Jimmy's Bar and Grill is debatable.
Still, I'm watching with passing interest, tapping my cane ever so slightly. Of course, it is all typical of such places in the world. Men like this, they know nothing but the grit of the dirt and violence.
Small minds, small ambitions. You are the first to see, as you're staying out of the fray, the blur of motion past the front windows of the bar. And you pick up, over the sound of Jerry Lee Lewis winding down, and someone switched on to Johnny Cash, which is slightly more acceptable in this environment. A mild scream outside that's abruptly cut.
I raise an eyebrow in alarm, and then look around to see if anyone else is doing anything about this scream. What on earth could that be?
One person, you see a couple of people look up and shrug, because they don't hear the scream continue. And they shrug, they take their drinks, they carry on talking. A couple of them laugh about it, must just be some kids playing up.
Well, hearing that, my instincts kick in. I'd better look into what's going on here. And I move to go to the door to investigate what is happening.
Say what, where are you going? Haven't finished your drink?
Let me just see what's going on there. You heard the scream, right? Gotta make sure that no one's in trouble.
He just waves you away.
It was just some kid outside, I'm sure. I say, and I take another sip.
You open the door, And on her knees, in the doorway, a bloody red scratch. 3, or almost like 3 talons had been dragged across her chest and down to her abdomen, leaving trails of oozing blood. She looks up at you. A young woman, no older than 20, one ear hanging loose. And she begs, she says, "Please, mister, please. Something terrible's happened down at Makeout Point. Something came up from the water. Something snatched away Chip Johnson. He's gone. He's gone!" And she screams. And now finally the people in the bar and grill stop, and they pay attention. And it's your call to arms to investigate what has occurred at Makeout Point in Denton, Alabama.
You have listened to an episode of Red Moon Roleplaying, where we played the campaign Terror at Makeout Point, for They Came From Beneath the Sea. Our Gamemaster was the gentleman gamer, Matthew Dawkins, who also created the game. They Came From Beneath the Sea is published by Onyx Path Publishing, and we would like to extend a big thank you to them and to Matthew for doing this actual play project with us. They Came From Beneath the Sea is on Kickstarter until the 24th of January, so please do follow the link in the show notes and check it out if you haven't already. The music for this episode is taken from the Cryo Chamber collaborations Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, Shub-Niggurath, and Nyarlathotep, and is used with permission from Cryo Chamber. Please check out cryochamber.bandcamp.com or their YouTube channel for more of their lovely dark ambient. Finally, a big thank you to all of our Patreon backers. Creating all of this content would not be possible without your generous support on Patreon. You give us loads of energy, you help us cover our costs, and you open up time for us to record and edit. So, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you ever so much. See you again soon.